Hey guys, welcome to the Rubin Report. I am Dave Rubin. I've got two TYT All-Stars with me, John Iadarola, Kim Horcher, and we've got a lot to talk about. So, all right, it was a pretty good week so far for the gays. That's right, the Supreme Court let stand 5 federal appellate court rulings, so a bunch more states are getting gay marriage. Utah, Oklahoma, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Indiana. So we've got an updated gay marriage map. All right, there you go. Dark blue, fully legal, and the light blue are the new states. And the gray, they like that traditional old-fashioned marriage. Do you guys want to comment on the map?
One man and a harem.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Anything else interesting? Do you find anything interesting? Gays like water, apparently. Everything close to water except down south.
Well, if you're gonna, you can have like super conservatives like to one side of you. You don't want to be surrounded by them, ideally.
Yeah.
Not much surprising about that map. I mean, New Mexico possibly. That's pretty much it.
That's
in terms of the long-established ones.
Okay, so the interesting thing I think about this is CNN's Jeffrey Toobin, who's their chief legal analyst. He basically said that the Supreme Court did not do their duty by not hearing this case, because that's what would have led to all the states in the union getting gay marriage. But don't let me speak for him. Let's listen in.
Well, you know, this is why we have a Supreme Court, right? To settle complicated, controversial legal issues. Frankly, I think it's outrageous that the court didn't take this case. I mean, you know, the way the court works is it takes 4 votes to agree to hear a case. It's 5 votes to reach a judgment, but 4 votes to hear a case. And apparently there were not 4 votes to take these cases. Now, the justices may say, though they don't explain these rulings, look, there is no controversy in the courts of appeals now. They have all ruled that same-sex marriage is the law. We don't need to settle a disagreement. There could be some strategic voting going on the part of some of the justices saying, we don't want to take this case because our side may lose. That's something that goes on. But frankly, I think this was a real abdication of duty on the part of the Supreme Court. The discussion about same-sex marriage has been going on in this country for quite some time. And the country has changed so much. And there are so many states that have it now that, you know, 19. Yes, the court shouldn't get ahead of the public, but, you know, the public is, you know, now all the polls show a majority favor same-sex marriage. It's a place where it seems to me it's past time for the Supreme Court to step in. But you know what? I don't get a vote.
Okay, so I think that's really interesting what he's saying there. So yes, we got some more gay marriage. That's pretty good. Most people are down with that. But that the court itself didn't really do what its duty is. This seems kind of shitty. Like when I saw originally on Twitter, when I saw it rolling in, I was like, oh, this is all good, we're getting more states are coming around. But ultimately, isn't this exactly what the Supreme Court is supposed to do? Aren't they supposed to take the challenging cases?
They literally legally abided by what they were supposed to do. And he's like, well, I don't think this is right. I'm with the anchor, Michaela Pereira. Like, really? You think this is outrageous and a legal abdication?
But shouldn't they? Aren't they supposed to take the tough cases, and when something is being talked about nationally, as this has been going on long enough, aren't they supposed to jump in and say this is what the law of the land is?
I think Toobin's mostly historically accurate there, in that when you have 2 different sets of laws, like you're treating one group of people 2 different ways in different states, they're supposed to step in, but not especially the way it is right now. It's not so much that the laws are different in different states. Generally, historically, when it's a seriously contentious social issue, the Supreme Court will step in, not when the laws are different, but when different different district judges and things like that are ruling differently. Like if you had a Supreme Court, a same-sex marriage ban knocked down in one state and then upheld by a district court, and then in a different state it's struck down by a district court. Usually when there's judicial disagreement, that's when the Supreme Court will step in.
So isn't it close enough to that, though? That's kind of what's happening here, right?
It seems like in all of these cases that we were talking about that they might have picked up, it was basically that the law was saying you can't have same-sex marriage, and then the judiciary was saying you can. There seemed to be pretty widespread agreement by the judges in terms of what the law should be. And so that might not have been contentious enough judicially for the Supreme Court to feel they had to step in.
Right. So as I assume both of you are for same-sex marriage, wouldn't you want the court to do this? We're forgetting the legal, whether they technically legally had to do it or whether it was okay. Wouldn't you want them to step up and do something that would just get this issue off the table, isn't it? Aren't you sick of talking about it?
It has been a long time, but I do agree that we need to do what's legally proper, because I stand by keeping our legal system legal and by the book, rather than just, well, my religion says this and my feelings say that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think whatever allows it to be the law of the land would be good, but I would say that if you think that in 5 or 10 years it's going to be effectively wide across the entire country, which is probably going to be the case, I think the best possible way would be for people's opinions to change and then the laws to be changed, as opposed to it being mandated by the Supreme Court, which could, in the case of like Roe v. Wade, it could lead to long-standing resentment by the people who feel like they ruled the wrong way. I would rather that it was a popular decision.
Right.
And it's moving so fast. I saw a chart today, I think, on Vox that compared approval rates for same-sex marriage historically versus interracial marriage. About 3 decades after it was legally allowed, you were able to have interracial marriage, for it to reach majority approval. In the case of same-sex marriage, it's reached majority approval even before it's legal.
Yeah, so it is happening quickly. To me, what this more is about is, of course, I'm happy with what happened here, and I guess maybe I'm not as patient as what you're saying, which I think is a legitimate point. But it seems to me it just shows how broken our system is. Like right now, we're at war in Syria. Congress didn't vote for it. We have branches of government that are supposed to do different things. So Congress didn't vote on us going to a new country to attack them. Forget attacking Iraq again, that's fine. And here, the Supreme Court is not, I just don't see them doing what they're supposed to do, despite that's a pretty sound argument that I think you're making.
Yeah, well, look, if your argument is that the system is broken, you're going to have widespread agreement throughout this building.
With TYT, yeah. Do you think the gay marriage thing is over? I really believe, I've been saying it for a while on the show, that the Republicans are actually going to be for it in 2016, whoever runs.
We've been watching, conservative candidates and people in office, slowly migrate their views this way as the popular opinion moves this way, which makes me think maybe you don't care and you just want the votes and you're just doing what's popular. And if that's what it takes, fine.
Imagine
let it be.
Elected officials only doing something because it's popular. Isn't that bizarre? Well, actually, speaking of that, I mean, Ted Cruz really is the only person in the Republican Party who really came out against this. So that shows that the Republicans are really coming around, right?
Yeah, I think that even he will back off. I mean, traditionally, when you have an issue like this being pushed by one party, it's either because they think they can make a lot of money off of it, or they can move a lot of votes by it. Historically, same-sex marriage has never been an absolutely massive fundraising tool for the Republicans in the way that like abortion rights are, or something like that. And there's so much overlap in terms of the people who oppose same-sex marriage with other traditionally more lucrative issues like abortion. Why not just move them on that issue? And not risk turning off some moderate Republicans who might be in favor of same-sex marriage.
All right, there you go. Call me crazy. I'm for gay marriage and also for a functional system. I know that's nuts, but what can I say? I'm a dreamer. So this Ebola craziness continues. I think we did a pretty good job of breaking down the science with Cara Santa Maria last week. So if you want to just find out about the science and the facts of what's going on, we will link to it right here, right where my hand is right now, and you can find out about the facts. But now I want to talk about what's going forward. So the World Health Organization is now saying that it is, quote, quite unavoidable that Ebola will spread throughout Europe, and we've got a quote. Such imported cases as have happened in Spain will happen also in the future, most likely. It is quite unavoidable because of the extensive travel both from Europe to the affected countries and the other way around. The most important thing in our view is that Europe is still at low risk and that the western part of the European region particularly is best prepared in the world to respond to viral hemorrhagic fevers, including Ebola. Now we've got some video of President Obama, because he's getting a lot of shit, basically, for people saying he's not being strong enough, we're not doing more at our borders and at airports, et cetera, et cetera. So let's listen to the president.
I know that the American people are concerned about the possibility of an Ebola outbreak, and Ebola is a very serious disease. And the ability of people who are infected to carry that across borders is something that we have to take extremely seriously. At the same time, it is important for Americans to know the facts, and that is that because of the measures that we've put in place, as well as our world-class health system, and the nature of the Ebola virus itself, which is difficult to transmit, the chances of an Ebola outbreak in the United States is extremely low.
our world-class health system, like the hospital in Texas that turned away the Ebola patient who actually died this morning. We've got a quote from Obama that I think kind of wraps this thing up. "We don't have a lot of margin for error. We're also going to be working on protocols to do additional passenger screening, both at the source and here in the United States. The good news is that it's not an airborne disease. We know what has to be done and we have the medical infrastructure to do it, but this is an extraordinarily virulent disease when you don't follow the best protocols." Okay, so right now we don't have a ban on travel from or to West Africa. People are saying our airport security is too lax, et cetera, et cetera. So again, not getting into the science end of it, do you guys have faith in our system? Just the basic system that we have. When they say we have the best healthcare in the world and the border, like none of that really seems true to me.
Yeah, well, it seems inconceivable in a country as large as ours, with as many international flights as ours, going into so many different cities which have different levels of safety regulations at the airports, coming from international airports that have differing levels of security. It seems hard to believe that there won't be any more cases. I do think that we've been pretty good as a country in terms of walling it off once it starts. Like I don't expect it to spread outside of Dallas and things like that, but I don't think that we've seen the last of it here in America. Europe, I think, it's even more likely to come. I mean, you're talking about so many different countries, a lot of travel between those countries. I think it's more likely to spread at least a little bit there.
Yeah. Do you have faith in our system?
Well, as Kara explained before, with our from a medical and hygienic standpoint, it's unlikely to break out.
Right, it's very hard to
It's hard for me to get away from that point to say like, oh, we need to lock everything down. But I do think we need to be paying more attention to this seriously and have a little, what is that word? Empathy for people who are at risk for this.
Yeah. What do you think about? I don't want to be alarmist because I think, especially if you watch cable news, everyone immediately watch Fox and the scary graphics and scary music and all that. But why not for 2 weeks? Let's say just temporarily for 2 weeks, we're just going to stop flights in and out of West Africa. Would that just while we sort of get our head wrapped around this thing? Would that be a bridge too far for you?
It certainly seems reasonable to me, and I think that if you polled the American people, there would be widespread agreement on it. But that said, I'm not an expert on what exactly that would entail, what negative consequences it would have, and I've heard from people who are supposedly experts on that issue that it's not feasible. And I don't think that those people have some sort of covert agenda to get Ebola into the country. But I totally agree with you.
Because Rush Limbaugh thinks that that Obama's trying to bring it here to counteract slavery.
He does feel guilty.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you about the media. We as the media are put in a pretty shitty situation right now because they have been fear-mongering so much in the initial weeks of the Ebola outbreak that we feel like we have to be the counterpunch to that, and yet we're also legitimately scared of what we think is a reasonable worry about Ebola.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the right wing both is scared about Ebola because one of the main characteristics of the conservative brain is a heightened fear center, but they're also using it to advance their agenda in terms of anti-immigration. They want to shut down the borders, but they also wanted to shut down the borders a month ago.
Yeah.
They want to use it to attack Obama and to attack any sort of international peacekeeping or humanitarian efforts. I mean, they're trying to kill 10 birds with one stone with Ebola. And so on the other side, what are we supposed to do to have people be rationally scared of it, but not insanely scared?
Yeah. So they have a heightened fear center. I thought they have a heightened money sensor.
Probably both. I think they butt up against each other.
Everything is an attack on Obama, and it's Obama's fault if you haven't noticed that yet. But this isn't fear-mongering. We have this report of this nurse in Spain who's been infected because she was around people who had actually died, missionaries. And these are things that are actually happening. So it is important that we do discuss this as it is a real topic, but that it is kind of a difficult position to say, okay, that we're not fear-mongering, but this is what's actually happening.
Right. I heard this morning actually now they're going to put her dog down too because they think the dog could possibly spread Ebola. So it's just like the stories just keep getting weirder and weirder, I think, which is part of it. Do you think also part of the discussion is that we can't do two things at once? I say this on the show every week. We can't debate two things at once in America. So we got so much going to ISIS right now, which we're going to get to in a second, that if now Ebola, maybe we can kind of balance two things, but if Ferguson flares up again or something else, there's just not enough brain power in this country to deal with a couple things at once.
Does anyone remember Ukraine? The
Yeah, what
war
happened
they
to that?
had with nobody's
They-
talking about that.
they
for some
took
reason.
that, Russia
I
took
think
Crimea,
Putin,
right? Yeah.
put Ebola into West Africa, actually.
It would stand to reason.
And yeah, and look, I guess I have to say this as a devil's advocate. Like when it's something like Ebola, which we don't have a lot of experience with, I'm talking about the average person. They don't know how scared they should be. Like we're getting so scared about something that has killed so far one person in America. Legitimately, it's killed over 3,000 in Africa. That is scary. And yet, look at all the things that we could stop in America that are killing tens of thousands every year and we don't care about. Try to get somebody worked up about the long-term effects of climate change and we'll deal with that in 100 years or something. But Ebola, serious issue, gotta fix it today, even if it means cutting off all international travel.
Yeah, okay, final thought on this. Do you think there is some racial element to this? Because this is the new thing that I keep seeing popping up on Twitter, that people keep saying, well, it's been in Africa and it's killing thousands of people, I think around 3,000 people, and no one really cared. And now it's creeping here, and it could creep to Europe, and once it starts killing white people, then people are going to get upset. Do you think that's a legitimate...
I think it's a complete lack of empathy for people who aren't directly related to you or your interests or your status quo.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if it's, I don't want to say, oh, it's racist, but it's definitely like ignorance, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had the Andre Tantaros talking about how people in America are going to go from West Africa are going to go try to see witch doctors instead of regular doctors. So I think that there's some element of like casual racism there. I think it's going to be interesting to see though how conservatives will react if it gets into Europe, but it only kills French people. They'll be very torn at that point.
Then they'd be okay with that. There you go. All right, let's talk about ISIS. This thing just does not end. Apparently there's going to be another beheading of an American. This time it was a British person last week, but a reporter on Friday. We're taping this on Wednesday right now. And an interesting poll came out that said nearly 2 out of 3 Americans back airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. Now, 65% of Americans back U.S. airstrikes. That seems like an incredibly high number to me. A little more than a third say they're opposed to sending ground troops. 53% say they think there's a high risk of a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Despite the concern, only a third are closely following news of U.S. airstrikes. This is perfect storm for a disaster. Now, as I've said since we started this thing, Congress has not voted to authorize this war. John Boehner, Mr. Bravery, keeps saying, well, Obama should call us back in so we can vote on it. I'm pretty sure he doesn't have to get authorization from the president to do his job. So it's Congress's fault. It's also Obama's fault because he's just going ahead and doing strikes without getting authorization. And yes, everyone can argue about the legal loopholes that they all jump through to make this happen. But I wanted to make this about the American people because 2 out of 3 people are happy bombing these guys. That seems incredibly high to me, considering we didn't really have a debate about it. When last year, when Assad used chemical weapons, there was a debate for a couple weeks about what we should do, should Obama get authorization, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're bombing the guys that are fighting Assad, and we're not even having a debate about it. So what's going on?
I think it's somewhat understandable to, if maybe you're not completely fluent on the subject, to want to fight fire with fire, or crazy with crazy. But there are well, you know, it's not under debate right now, but if we were to do this without that, I think there's a lot of long-term ramifications that we're not considering, and you know, a further escalation of violence, more years with military occupation, and I don't think we're ready to do that yet.
Yeah. All right. So I know you're a constitutionalist, John. So something like that. You know about the government. How about that? That sounded good, right?
Yeah.
You know a little. So what do you think
try.
about just the congressional part of it? Because I keep talking about it. Literally nobody's talking about it.
Yeah.
It is not discussed in the news. We went to war with a new country.
Yeah.
We're not fighting the regime in Syria, the guy that we were gonna fight a year ago, who John Kerry compared to Hitler. Now we're literally bombing the people he's fighting. But what about that? Just the congressional part first.
I mean, if you look back historically, the way that we go to war has never really followed with what I assume the founders thought we would. I mean, we tried to get the War Powers Act in place to try to rein in the power of the president to unilaterally send us into some military conflict. That was weak on day 1, and it's only weaker in year 40 after it was passed. So I'm not super surprised by that, especially when, if they were to have the debate in the House and in the Senate, I think that they would support it. I think that
I do too, which is even more odd that
so
Obama's...
surprising that he didn't.
Yeah.
That is correct. But I think one of the reasons that he feels he can get away with not even having that debate, a debate that he would almost certainly win, but maybe he's worried that if they had it, some strings would be attached that he doesn't want. It's a lot safer to go it alone. There's two principal reasons I think it's been so easy to get the American people to back this. One, that it's airstrikes and it's not a full-on war with boots on the ground. I think that coming out of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, airstrikes seem like, oh, that's nothing. We can do that. We do that all the time, right? Aren't we airstriking so many places?
Right.
And then even more importantly, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was pitched to the American people as this is not a war against Islam, this is a war against these regimes. Now it seems pretty clear that we're fighting at least some form of Islam.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment among the
Although
American
Obama
people.
says they're not Islamic and they're not a state.
He says that, yes,
Right.
that's true. But you go on Fox News and you look at you look at what ISIS is pointing out, and it seems like that's what we're fighting against. And so I think for the American people who don't understand and probably at the very least distrust Muslims and Islam, I think it's easy to get them to want to constrain that power in some way.
Right. How much of this do you think has to do with just the general state of our minds when it comes to war? We're still in Afghanistan. Do you know why we went there in the first place? Fight them over there to fight us here?
It was a long time.
Yeah, nobody knows why we're there. It's the longest war in American history. We just signed some pact that means we're going to be there till at least 2024, and mark my words, we will be there long after that. So is part of this just that war means nothing to us anymore? Sort of John's point of the airstrikes. It's like, well, airstrikes isn't war. Even though I'm pretty sure if someone was airstriking us, we'd call that war, wouldn't we?
Well, we say airstrike and we say drone attack, but we don't really think about what that means a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about the beheading, and there's something about the human brain that they look at a beheading, and it seems so very different than a bomb that kills 10 people. Whether it's a bomb that we drop from a drone, or if it's ISIS blowing up a village, like we care more about the single hostage who's beheaded than the thousands of people that have already been killed by ISIS in more traditional violence.
Yeah. So where do you guys stand with the beheading things? Because we've talked about it here. We've shown some of the videos. Twitter's now not letting you post the beheading videos themselves, but there's plenty of beheading stuff out there on YouTube. Do you think it's just feeding the propaganda? Because I'm sort of two minds on this. Partly, I think you have to show it and talk about it because it's happening. So not talking about it doesn't help. And then on the other hand, there is the propaganda version where if we keep talking about it, you just gin up, especially the uneducated people who just see it and then immediately want to attack. Where do you fall on how much we should talk about and show the visuals of actually what they're doing?
Well, it is a disgusting and horrible act to watch someone literally lose their head, but we have to consider how many other people are being killed horribly and unjustifiably as well. It's not to excuse that, and it's not to let that go. We should mention it at least.
Yeah.
But
we have a weird thing about how
you have to think about
died.
it in context.
Right. So
And it's horrible. This
Yeah.
huge picture.
It's horrible. I think we all agree on that for sure. But we have this weird thing on how people die that sometimes it's not okay. So Assad killed around 100,000 Syrians with conventional weapons. Everyone seemed okay with it. Then the gas thing, I think it was about 200 people. Everyone went crazy. We ended up not doing anything, or I guess maybe we took the chemical weapons.
Most of them.
Kind of. Now we're upset about beheading again. So it's weird to me that we pick and choose. Well, I guess it does have to do with the visuals, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're delivering basically a media package for people to put on. I think early on it was important for us to show them both because it was new at that point, and also we wanted people to understand the severity of the threat that we were facing. But now I feel like, usually on the Young Turks, if the family says that they want or don't want it to be shown, that's usually what we go by. We don't want to offend the families who've already been through so much. But perhaps more importantly now, I feel like ISIS wants us to show them, and so I'm inclined not to. And I feel like if they were to put one out and no one was to spread it on Twitter or on cable news, would they be less likely to make another one? I think they'd be somewhat less likely, and so I'm inclined to not show them from now on.
But they still might be doing the beheadings.
they might still be
maybe
doing
just
it.
not showing them. Final thought on this: why don't other countries do more? Which I think I've said in every ISIS video that we've done. Like, everyone hates America for jumping in and trying to fix things, and we always make it worse and all that. But it seems to me like right now, ISIS is on the Syrian border. They're about to take this town. I'm sorry, ISIS is on the Turkish border, and they're about to take. Yeah, they're in Syria. Yeah. Why don't Turkey's got a pretty big army. I mean, all these countries there, they have armies. Why is it that we have to lead everybody all the time when it's in their backyards, not in our backyards?
I would say that it's a burden that we willingly took on ourselves after World War II and have continued to take on ourselves in every possible opportunity. I think that, first of all, Turkey is going to get involved. If they take this town on the Turkish side of the border with Syria, they're going to have to respond. ISIS is in an interesting position right now, both that they can strike inside of Turkey potentially very soon, and also that they're right on the borders of Baghdad. We've sort of come to grips with the current territory that they hold in Iraq and in Syria. If they take either of those two particular towns, or city in the case of Baghdad, I think that then you might see an international ramping up. And also, by the way, it is the United States that's leading the charge, but we do have France and Australia, which are contributing to the airstrikes. We have some Arab allies, including the UAE, that are flying missions against ISIS. So it is almost all us, but it's not just us.
Yeah, but we know that it's like 90% us.
Yeah.
And something, it just seems odd. Yeah, France and Australia, we're all kind of doing it, but all the guys in their own backyards who have weapons, who we give weapons to, much like the UAE, like we give these guys weapons and then they still ask us to help. I don't know, it is extremely complex. So let's talk about Twitter, my favorite habit and my 140 character addiction. Twitter right now is suing the US government. They have filed a lawsuit in federal court claiming that the US government, well, they're fighting them on the right to publish their full transparency of reports. And I think this is kind of interesting because with all this NSA stuff that we're hearing about, we know that the NSA can go into your Skype account and see your chats or whatever it is, or the video calls, or all the Facebook stuff and Gmail, et cetera, et cetera. Twitter is the most transparent because you're tweeting publicly. So the only really hidden thing in Twitter, I guess, is the DMs. So I do think that's kind of interesting. But we've got a quote from the Twitter representative. We filed a lawsuit in federal court seeking to publish our full transparency report and asking the court to declare these restrictions on our ability to speak about government surveillance as unconstitutional under the First Amendment. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is already considering the constitutionality of the non-disclosure provisions of the NSL law later this week. So this is interesting. As I said, Twitter does seem to be more transparent. Why is the most transparent social media company the one that's fighting the US government? Kim?
I think it's great that they're fighting for transparency because, you know, we've seen this blowback on a lot of different social media and also email and different web platforms of, you know, hey, we have to tell you this is happening, but that's all we can say.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's only fair that they should be able to have some control over what happens in their own business.
Yeah. Is there any chance that they win this lawsuit? I mean, the NSA is just going to do what, right? The Fed
even if they win, like, they're going to do it anyway.
Right, or that they, okay, congratulations, you won, and now we're going to figure out some backdoor channel to
take
get
the
in.
information. Yeah, well, I think it's unlikely at this point that they're going to win, which is why it's so unsurprising that they're publicizing the fact that they're fighting them. If you know that you're not going to be able to beat the U.S. government, why not at least get the sort of authenticity and credibility that comes from being seen to be trying to fight them? I mean, it's like sort of a, I don't know, a silver lining, I suppose, to the issue.
Have you guys kind of given up on the online privacy thing? You know, there was a point maybe 6 months ago where, especially around here and in most circles on the left at least, where we were talking about this constantly, right? Just constantly talking about it. And now I feel that people have just kind of resigned themselves. Sadly, obviously you haven't personally, the look you're giving me, but really the sort of broader community, I like the side eye, that the broader community has just kind of given up and been like, yeah, you know what, they're just going to do it and there's nothing we can do.
Well, it's easy to feel powerless because you almost literally are powerless, but I think you have to continue to fight back and show that you're not going willingly, and you have to struggle, and you have to, you know, send messages and call your congressperson, and you need to be united in forces like with the EFF. You can't just like lie down and give up, especially if it's, you know, your privacy. That's yours. That's sacred to you.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we're having all this stuff with net neutrality, and that's looking like it's going to disappear. And it seems to me we had the golden age of the internet. We had it, and now we're shifting. It was really good. It was free. It was free, and we got music, and it was there, and it was honest. And now we're going into something else. What should we call this evil phase that we're going into?
Step two, I guess. I don't know, but and it's scary. I just saw, you know, internationally, a lot of international ISPs are looking to see how the U.S. is going to rule on net neutrality. I think it's interesting that in a country like America that's known for being politically apathetic at the best of times, we've had a couple of big moments where we had like the protests against the war with Iraq originally, we had Occupy Wall Street, we had the fights over privacy in the wake of the Snowden revelations. But then, like, you can only galvanize people for so long, and out of Occupy Wall Street we got a little bit but not much.
Yeah.
But at least we are still talking about equality. And out of the fights over privacy, we got a little bit in Congress, but not much. But at least people are thinking about it to some extent. But you can't
Congress
keep people.
They did get upset when they found out the NSA was spying on them.
Yeah,
they weren't
you make
upset
it personal
until,
for them.
Until Dianne Feinstein, they found out they were reading her emails. Then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as soon as John Boehner was involved in the fappening, I knew that he'd take it a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
But you can only keep people galvanized for so long. A year is pretty long to keep activists working.
Another reason I think Twitter is kind of the linchpin of this whole thing is, to me, it seems that everything going on in the world, all the revolutions that we see, all of the stuff going on in Ferguson and in Hong Kong and what happened in Egypt, it was all fueled by Twitter. That was the one. It wasn't Facebook. I never, if there's some breaking news, I never go to Facebook. I wouldn't even think of going to Facebook, but you do go to Twitter. So is Twitter sort of like the last bastion of this? Like, we really need Twitter to somehow remain independent, right?
Twitter can be a beautiful thing. I mean, we're able to hear about things that we wouldn't know about. Like, we learned about Ferguson so much after so much like locking down and not speaking, but like people were able to talk and be public and be open, and that was beautiful. That's one of the best parts of the web and social media.
Yeah.
And I think as it becomes more ubiquitous, people are going to, or officials are going to want to tighten that down a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that Twitter is still probably the premier service internationally for that sort of, I guess, crowdsourcing of protest. But we can't forget that while Twitter remains, on top in America, internationally, there are regional and country-specific equivalents that might be taking over some of that responsibility.
Right. Have you guys signed up for ELO yet? That's what the kids are all. They're all on the ELO. Are you on the ELO? You're not on the ELO?
I'm in line for ELO.
Maybe I know a guy. I'll see what I can do for you. All right, final thought on this. What do you fear more, giant companies or giant government? It's a bit of a jump from where we started, but I think it's interesting. Where are we at now? Or is it the companies that we should fear, or is it the government? I don't know the answer. I used to always say that it was the government, that I fear giant government. Or do you fear them equally?
Sure.
Yeah?
I think
50-50.
this one is somewhat simple in that we benefit from, in America, the corporations have bought the government, so why not just fear them and you get both?
There you go. All right, we fear everybody around here. Okay, let's talk about UFOs. I don't fear UFOs, and there's been a lot of sightings of UFOs. We've got some video out of Denver's KUSA TV. That's their NBC affiliate. Let's take a look.
Been the talk of the town around Breckenridge all day. Even if now here at 5 o'clock, I'm about the only person willing to get in front of a camera and talk about the UFOs that were flying overhead. There was 3 white dots, I'll show you, that were flying over Breckenridge behind me late this morning. Looked as if they were hovering right over Baldy Mountain behind me. And while no one from the Breckenridge Police Department or Sheriff's Departments wanted to talk about the objects on camera, several people at those organizations saw them, and others around town reported the strange things flying over the skies of Breckenridge, sending police out to investigate these shiny white tiny dots in the sky. Some people off camera said they saw them form triangles and a line. On our camera, it seemed as if they didn't move at all. In fact, it took some help for most people to even see them. The FAA didn't have a comment on what these dots could be, nor had said they're not tracking any abnormalities at this time. But yesterday, a TV station in Utah reported very similar white dots appearing in the sky over Utah. The objects were visible for about 3 hours. They showed up best when the sun was reflecting off of them.
Okay, so the FAA is not commenting on it. The sheriffs won't comment on it. So if it was something legit, you'd think maybe there would be a comment or somebody would hand somebody a piece of paper or something. We've got images. This is an image of them. One of them, it's a close-up. This is taken in Utah. So I don't know what the hell that is. I have no idea. But a UFO is an unidentified flying object. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a little green man inside.
Thank you.
Kim,
I was
go.
going to say,
yes.
Unidentified flying object does not necessarily mean extraterrestrial. It just means we don't exactly have a handle on what it is right now. There has been some talk that maybe this is a high-altitude helium balloons. It's possible that it is related to a meteor. I wouldn't necessarily jump to conclusions.
Yeah, okay, but I want to jump to conclusions a little bit because that's the fun part, right? So, okay, before we get to Little Green Man and that whole thing, wouldn't it stand to reason that if there was something that the government didn't want us to know about, they could easily pass it off as weather balloon, or they can always give us some explanation, right? So until you see the little green man standing in front of you, there's always a way to get the out on belief, right?
Yeah, well, I would say weather balloon has some connotations that I think they want to avoid at this point, or swamp gas. I think the fact that it took place in Colorado and Utah, like if you're in that quadrant of the country, the chance that it's an experimental aircraft is magnificently high. I think that that's most likely what it is. I mean, I think that if it was like a test bed for a new plane or something like that, it's much simpler to just not say anything, provide no information, hope it dies out.
We are testing a secret aircraft. Don't tell anyone.
But once people start seeing it, if they want us, like, don't they have to admit it at that point then? You know what I mean? Like, shouldn't they be? No, they don't. They should make us wonder.
Have they done that in the past?
Well, I don't know what the hell's going on over at.
Tell me about
It
the
could also be not
transparency.
government related. I mean, it could be maybe Google's testing their gigantic balloons that are supposed to provide internet, around the globe or something like. I actually have a theory. Can we look at the picture one more time?
Throw that picture back up.
I feel like if you zoomed in, you'd see Glinda the Good Witch floating around in that. That could possibly be
I
it.
think this could be a Wizard of Oz type thing.
Yeah, I think that's more likely than aliens.
All right, let's pretend it's aliens for just a second. I have a theory that if the aliens come here first, they're going to kill us. And if we get wherever we're going, we're going to Mars now, wherever we're going, if we get there first, it's whoever gets there first is going to kill the other one, right? We're not going to, is there any chance we're going to live peacefully with aliens when they arrive here? Are we going to welcome them and treat them okay?
Calm down.
Yeah, calm
Yeah,
down.
like
I've
immediately.
watched too many sci-fi movies.
A little much.
Yeah, you think really if aliens got here that we would treat them well and
Oh, we would be shitty, but we don't necessarily need to assume that everyone is shitty. I mean, maybe they've well, this is so theoretical.
Yeah, let's do
incredibly
it.
theoretical.
Yeah.
I'm not a kook.
Yeah.
I don't. If they were advanced enough to come to our planet from whatever far distance away, I'm hoping that as a society they're not crazy.
Right, but wouldn't it
warmongers.
stand to reason that they'd sort of, if they had evolved to the point where they were going to other civilizations, there might be a reason they're going there, like resources. It's sort of like every Avatar and every sci-fi movie, like we're going to go to other planets because we're going to destroy this place. It's pretty obvious. So we're going to wreck this neighborhood. Then we got to go somewhere else. And sorry, if there's other guys there that aren't as involved as we are, we might mess them up.
I think this is one of the reasons I've always liked Russian science fiction, because they have a series of books. I think Roadside Picnic is the first one where, yes, they do kill us, but they don't kill us intentionally. They don't go to war with us. It's like if we land on an island, yeah, maybe we kill the indigenous rodents, but we're not thinking about it. We don't have a PowerPoint about it. And I think, like Neil deGrasse Tyson has talked about, if you look at, it took just a couple of million years of evolution and a couple of percentage points of DNA to separate a mouse from a human. I mean, the idea that they might have evolved, 10 million years before us, the gap has got to be even larger than that. I mean, the idea that they would even recognize us as intelligent beings is difficult to comprehend,
They
I think.
found that golden record
Yeah,
on
I mean-
Voyager, and they were like, "Oh, that's cute."
Yeah, we had Chuck Berry a long time ago. I mean, ants can dig tunnels, but we don't think of them as intelligent.
Right, so is our best hope then sort of a War of the Worlds situation where they get here, they probably kill a whole bunch of us, but then they don't factor in that our environment's a little bit different, and then their machines start to rot and things like that. Is that our best and then Tom Cruise saves us, obviously.
Well, if it takes at least a few
No, you
weeks,
can't. Yeah.
if it takes at least a few weeks for them to show up, I think the most likely thing to kill them will be Ebola.
It absolutely will be Ebola. All right, we got one more for you. From aliens to life after death, there was an interesting medical study on what happens to people after they die. Are people coming back to life? Are they getting to that great white light? Let's take a look. Scientists at the University of Southampton have spent 4 years examining more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrest in the UK, US, and Austria. Nearly 40% of people who survived described some kind of awareness during the time when they were clinically dead before their hearts were restarted. 13% they had felt separated from their bodies and their senses had been heightened, and we've got a couple more findings for you. One man recalled leaving his body entirely, watching his resuscitation from the corner of the room. Despite being unconscious and dead for 3 minutes, he recounted the actions of the nursing staff in detail and described the sound of the machines. So we hear about this stuff all the time. John's already shaking his head. No, I know I've got another skeptic in Kim. But we hear about this stuff all the time, and I guess there really is no way of knowing, right? People aren't coming back from the dead, but it's an interesting thing to think about and to talk about.
It is interesting. Look, I love the idea of like resurrection and things like that. I think that that's very interesting. But the thing that always strikes me about these near-death experiences or like consciousness after death is that they're always so provincial. Like they always have the same senses humans have. They see things and they hear things. Even in the animal kingdom, there are other senses than that. There's echolocation. There's sensitivity to magnetic waves. Like they never have any new information. They only have the same sort of information a human suspended from the ceiling could have.
Right. Well, I guess they're still humans at that point, even if they're trans. So maybe we don't
they're
get
spiritual beings. They've transcended.
Okay, so John's given a pretty sound scientific explanation of why maybe this isn't real, but are some things just beyond science? Something like this is beyond what can be measured scientifically, right?
I read this article and I thought, okay, that's interesting. Perhaps the brain is able to react more than we thought beyond our current medical standards. I didn't read that as paranormal life after death. That's just, it's further of our understanding of, I suppose, the human brain, or perhaps how our trigger stimuli works when we're approaching death. I don't think that's any sign of anything paranormal or spiritual.
Yeah, so I think it does bring up some interesting points, because if we could somehow prove this or quantify that something actually is happening, it would change how we do end-of-life things, right? Like euthanasia and keeping people alive on machines. You might want to extend people's life if they were in some sort of alternate universe or whatever you want to call it. So it could change how we treat life, right?
Or in the opposite direction, if you knew that there was some life after death, you might just off yourself and want to experience that. I mean, for people who have a shitty situation right now but feel like this is all they have, if they knew they'd become some sort of floating wraith being, maybe they would want to kill themselves.
Well, let's make it Lord of the Rings now.
Was that a Lord of the Ring reference?
Yes.
It went right over my head. I thought that was just very sciencey.
But look, if they could prove it, I would love that. I would talk about it on my show constantly. It's just, at this point, I don't think that these sorts of experiences necessarily provide much proof.
We also have this article calls it biggest ever scientific study. Is this a scientific study because were there properly controlled conditions? It's a study right there.
No. I'm saying it is just a study.
Yeah, and it's all self-reported, and you know, perhaps we're experiencing things in the human mind that we might not normally experience when we're close to death, when we have this visceral reaction of I am going to die, and you know, perhaps the subconscious becomes more aware. I don't know, but it's great to study, and I think it does require more study.
So is that the part of it that's really the intriguing part? Is that fundamentally we will never know, and because we'll never know, we have to, it sort of prescribes whatever your life meaning is, you can prescribe to whatever the afterlife is, because they're not going to show you a paper one day and say this is what happens. It's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, or at least not anytime soon. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that for people who aren't particularly scientifically minded, or those who are, an area where science can't yet tread is definitely interesting, and it provides fertile ground for a lot of interesting hypothesizing.
Final thought, and this is the meaning of life question. Do you think it would take something out of life if we knew what it was all about? If we knew that there was an afterlife, do you think it would somehow...
Journey, destination.
Yeah, does it take some of the meaning out of what we're doing here? Because to me it seems like I don't know what the hell's going on after this thing. I'm not even sure what's happening now, but we're here, so I do the best I can, you know? So I think you would fundamentally lose something if you actually did know what was going on after.
Well, John's point about the continuous ritual suicide might become a thing unless, you know, your religion says don't commit suicide. But yeah, I very much feel that the journey is more important than the destination. My life is probably more important than whatever is after my life, because I can feel this and I can see this. I know it's here and I should be able to put some meaning into it.
Yeah, I think that for some people it definitely would, but I mean, even if as a teenager you're well aware of the fact that you're going to be an adult at some point, that doesn't mean that you just disregard your teen years. I mean, you still have to experience it, you still learn from it and grow. So I would hope that people, by the time we had proof, would be advanced enough to not be overly swayed by the proof.
All right, well, to recap this week's show, ISIS is possibly coming to get us, but don't worry, Americans want to bomb them first. Ebola also possibly coming, but have faith in our system or something. Aliens possibly coming, but maybe they'll be so evolved they won't want to hurt us. And there might be life after death. So we give you a little bit of everything. Follow John and Kim on the Twitterer. Their handles are right down below.
Oh, yes, follow me. I was shaking my head at the other thing.
Yes, follow her on the Twitter there. And we'll do it again next week. Thanks, guys.